Hi, welcome to Beyond. Come right this way. Your journey starts here through these magical doors. Enter the magical forest. Here we have John Walsh's donut generator. Would you like a donut? You receive the ancient perfected donut of substance. Here's Norm Scott's penumbra. The sound is turned down. Come on this way. Here we have Liz Ciara Jones' Goddess Altar. Enter into the room of expanded consciousness. Experience the giant lotus. Changes color if you clap. Experience the fur-covered furniture room. Lounge on the furry chair. Here's the augmented reality sandbox. And the map changes as the terrain changes. And the sand feels good. Here we have Volley Brawl. And the flipbook kit, Jellyfish of Wonder. And the magic skeleton that can answer your yes-no question. Shall we ask, will Beyond be a success?
I know you wish this to be true with all your heart, but my answer for you is no.
Wait. We don't like that answer.
We'll find the answer you seek in your home. The whirling motion of the wheel of time is steering off course. Looks like luck isn't going your way this time.
He has many negative ones.
The reply is hazy. Please try again later.
All right, we'll try again later. And then finally, in the foyer, we have the kinetoscope, the zoetrope. Video game. The belted wall created by members of the Ithaca community, many trying felting for the first time. And last but not least, Sparky, the giant rideable unicorn.
Laurence Clarkberg.
Hi there.
How's it going today?
Pretty good.
So we're in Beyond, and Gwen actually used this term the other day. I was working with her, and as people came in and experienced this amazing art exhibit, which was all interactive, that you were very instrumental in shaping, she called them Beyonders. And it made me think of the term burners.
Yeah, and there's a lot of overlap with the Beyond community and the burner community and the maker community.
What maker?
Maker as in makerspace. Makerspaces are sort of like community centers. Most big towns have at least one makerspace where people purchase tools together and teach each other how to use them.
I just got back from Pennsylvania. We're in Ithaca at the moment, and they had this huge art workshop in Fishtown, and there were people who were making things with wood, there were people who were making things with stone, there were people who were using 3D printers. Is that like a makerspace?
Yeah. A lot of those tools are too expensive for any one person to buy or for their spouse to approve the purchase of. So they have to band together with other people. Like a laser cutter is a $15,000 tool. So, but if 15 people each pay $1,000, then it becomes much more plausible.
I love that. I love the idea of being collaborative. Actually, this is something I'm thinking of. So my brother and I were at a gallery or a museum. Maybe it was it was First Friday in Ithaca. This was a little while back, and we were talking about how there were periods of artistic movements throughout the 19th and 20th century. So, for instance, there was the Impressionist movement, there was the Modernist movement, there was the Postmodernist movement, there was the Cubist movement, and so on within the art world. And you see how that was even embodied in the 60s and 70s. You had Andy Warhol, and there was this kind of makerspace, I guess, where there were artists that interacted, including Basquiat and Warhol, etc. So it seems like there's something happening right now in Ithaca, and I'm wondering, is there an artist movement or renaissance? Has that existed before in your experience that you were part of?
Boy, I don't know if the art world would even appreciate the kind of art that we're doing, because it seems like there is a huge divide between the commercial art world and the kind of art we're doing, where it's just the passion of people themselves. And a lot of people in the Beyond art world, or in the burner art world, might not even consider themselves artists. They're just having fun. And maybe decades from now, posthumously, people will want to buy the giant lotus or Sparky the giant unicorn and exhibit it at their mansion or in an art museum. But for now, we're just having fun. We're not even thinking about the money side of it. But so many artists, painters, and poets have to think about where do I fit into the existing art world. But we're coming at it from a completely different angle.
Yeah, and we're kind of embodying that right now. So you're kind of sitting on this furry couch almost. It reminds me a bit of what is that movie, Little Shop of Horrors?
Yeah, the chair has big teeth and a giant eye.
Right, and then we have these furry hats on, and behind us this beautiful lotus, which is kind of a bit like, what is her name? The painter who does all those flowers, Georgia O'Keeffe. So it's kind of Georgia O'Keeffe-esque in terms of its connotations.
Yeah.
And of course there's Sparky, and so it does feel like engaging in play, in experimentation, and almost like it's almost not like a intellectual process. Like when I'm in a gallery, there's a bit of that intellectual process. So what gave rise to Beyond? Maybe at some point we could pan the camera around so people could take a look at it. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think. All right, I think we have to put this out there. A lot of the inspiration for this kind of art, which you might call psychedelic art, is psychedelic drugs. I mean, if you, those of you who have experienced psychedelic drugs know that it can enhance the colors in your perceptions of things and the complexity and your various senses can be disconnected and reconnected in various ways. Synesthesia, I think it's called. And it seems clear that this kind of art is an attempt to portray that experience. And I think the art world often has much more subtle experiences they're trying to capture, but the psychedelic experience is very bright and very distinct and very otherworldly.
And was that intentional for you guys?
I think people are drawn to it who have had a psychedelic experience, and it begins a process in them, part of which is a kind of wanting to proselytize, just to show people the intense experience that they've had.
That makes me think of Sparky and how much Sparky's kind of been part of this psychedelic experience in some ways. Sparky's been very present in a lot of burns. I know I've experienced Sparky in some of the local burns in Ithaca.
Yeah, Sparky was originally created. My artistic partner Doug Shire and I made Sparky in the spring of 2019 to take him to the Burning Man in the Nevada desert in 2019.
The big one.
Yeah, and but he's also been very popular at a lot of the regional burns. So we've been going to maybe a festival every month or every other in the summer, maybe sometimes 2 festivals a month.
Yeah. I mean, for people who aren't looking at Sparky right now, I don't, we're using this term Sparky, like Sparky's a friend of ours. So, who is Sparky? How did Sparky get created?
So Sparky is a giant rideable unicorn. He's built on top of a pedal-powered cart, a 4-wheeled cart, and he is a steel frame covered with chicken wire and tule and festooned with thousands and thousands of LED lights, and he has a motorcycle seat on top so people can climb up and ride on top, and so it's a really powerful experience to ride a giant unicorn.
Yeah, and to the point where as you're talking and as we're engaging in like a psychedelic experience via our space, do you feel like space can recreate the way in which you engage with the world, so that even if you're not taking an external substance, that the artistic circumstance can almost catalyze that?
Yeah, I think, we can't know what other people are experiencing, but we can certainly look at the smiles on their face. Since we opened the Beyond space 3 months ago, we've had 1,000 people a week coming in, so that's almost 12,000 people have been through the space. And a lot of them, when people come in, they're tired, they just got off work, and they're kind of grouchy, and they are curious when they pass by, and then we're like, come on in, and they go through the space, and they're going, wow, oh my gosh, and and then when they come out, they're just glowing with joy, and it's just such a great feeling that Doug and I and all the Beyond artists created this thing that's provided 12,000 people with this joyful experience.
How'd that collaboration happen between you, Doug, and all these other artists?
Well, I guess Doug and I renewed we've known each other for over a decade, but we renewed our friendship in 2018. I guess he had been going to Burning Man for several years, and I went through a personal change in 2016, and I think he recognized a change in me, and maybe this was similar to a transformation he had gone through, and so we really bonded over that. I really saw him as a colleague or someone who understood what I went through. And what I went through was kind of like a psychedelic experience, kind of like being high on mushrooms for 5 years.
Yeah, I remember when I came across you. You were, I think, in your first year of the Shaktipat. You had this transmission where things shifted pretty radically from the terrestrial to almost cosmic.
Yeah, I had a transformative event. It probably only lasted a minute or so, and it just changed me deeply as a person. And it's hard to say what exactly happened in words. It was beyond words, but I went from being just very routinized person, someone who believed in scientific empiricism, to someone who could see things in a new light, and my belief system changed, and my personality changed, and it wasn't all good. That it was really hard on my wife, now my ex-wife, and my kids.
What about it? Like, what was hard for them?
Well, part of the process that I've since read a lot about this process and researched it, and it's a process where it kind of erases your personality, and so your social roles and your relationship to other people.
And when you say it kind of erases, when you say it, what are you referring to?
The process.
Okay, and what's the process? Like, what happened for you and to you? And you don't necessarily have to get too specific if that's uncomfortable, but just in terms of you could certainly use pseudonyms or whatever it is that feels comfortable for you. But like, what was the process, and what made it so that 5 years of your life were immersed in this other way of being?
Well, I mean, it's hard to describe the depth of it, and just externally, all that happened is I was sitting in my bike shop. I own a bike shop a few blocks from here, and a stranger came up to me and looked me right in the eyes and touched me on the knee, and in that moment I felt like I was rising up out of my body, and I wondered what was happening to me. I was really frightened, but it also felt really good, like blissful, and then next thing I knew, I was back in my body talking to this person. She wanted to rent a bike for me. And but after that moment, my personality started changing, and I became much more aware of energetic things. And, and I became much more aware of the ways in which our true selves all come from the same source. And it wasn't like reading about it. It was like feeling myself changing from the inside out.
Mm. What did that look like? I know part of my draw to you and part of our connection has had to do with this process.
Yeah.
That you were having this almost what some people would describe as a self-realization process, self-actualization, a spiritual awakening. You know, there's different terms used in different cultures. And for some people, it's a moment, but it was yours for you.
Yeah, I found that I just needed a lot of alone time after that moment, and my job became unimportant to me, and I had to quit my job.
What was your job?
I was working as a graphic designer, a web designer, and I had several projects going on that I just had to tell my clients, I can't do this anymore. I can't even sit in front of my computer anymore. My hands don't want to go on the keyboard.
It kind of reminds me of Neo and the Matrix. I know it's cliche, like there's so many references to Matrix. Amazing movie, I love it. I can't get enough of it, but how he's kind of in this day-to-day existence. You know, he goes to his cubicle, he does his computer work, and yeah, I know that you kind of came from this very nuclear family structure, housewife, kids, and
I was the housewife.
and then also the routinized job that you mentioned, graphic design, and then you left it all.
Yeah.
And you didn't necessarily leave it, though, right? It was who you became.
Faded away.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would you have been able to engage and create the art that you do now then?
I don't think so, because when I did art before that event, I really didn't have anything to say. But since that event, I have something to say, and I want to show people like this other side of existence exists. We're all capable of going through this process, getting to the other side, and since then too, I've revisited books that I've read or art that I've experienced, and I've seen it in this new light, and I can see. For much of art, that's what the artists are trying to say. They're trying to explain this other place, this other way of being, but it can't be said in words easily. And people often won't hear it if you say it too directly. So you have to be sneaky about it.
Right. Well, I mean, what's interesting about what you're saying is, on the one hand, through the art you're creating now, and the artistic experience you're creating now, you're hoping to be able to sneakily, as you said, teach people how to maybe shift their way of engaging and thinking and saying things. But then what I'm also hearing, though, is that there is almost like a intervention that happened in your life, like an intervention that was beyond you, that came from a higher source, and that's what was the trigger, right? So then how do you can everyone have this experience if they don't have that intervention, if they aren't in their shop or in their day-to-day, and then someone comes in?
I can't say I know the answer to that question, but it does seem like people who have taken psychedelic drugs have had a similar experience, and maybe it's temporary, but it can give you a glimpse into what I experienced without drugs. Or there are lots of routes to it. I think there can be routes through yoga, through self-discipline. There are ways to snap you out of what scientists now call the default mode network. It's actually, if you do an MRI of someone's brain, most people are just using a small part of their brain, and it's a part of their brain that has a lot of assumptions, and it's a very comfortable state of mind to be in because you don't really have to think too hard. But the brain apparently has other modes where you can be much more sensitive to energetic effects around you and much more in tune with nature, and even you can exist on different scales in a way.
What do you mean by that? Like, exist on different scales?
Well, I just have this idea that the universe is fractal-like in structure, so that forms and processes on one scale, as in like the macro scale would be, where humans live, and we live in a world of rooms and buildings and cars and lampposts, and but those objects are mirrored on larger scales and smaller scales. So in some ways, we also exist on the planetary scale, planets and suns and solar systems and galaxies, where we also exist in a microscopic scale, and they're all connected in some way. And this idea that things are connected on different scales can be expressed visually with a mathematical shape called the fractal. And you can see, if you look at the overall fractal and then you zoom in at the details of the fractal, the same shapes repeat themselves at different scales. So who we really are is not just this body in this scale, but we exist in all different scales.
I was thinking about that when you mentioned the brain and the different networks that exist. So can a fractal of us exist in the absence of the brain? Like, how important is the brain and our individual brains to who we are?
Yeah, I was thinking about that the other day. Judy and I have been watching the zombie movies, and basically to kill the zombie you have to kill their brain.
Huh.
But it seemed to me that is wrong-headed. I don't think our true selves exist only in one organ. And that who we are is a collaboration of all our different organs, which also the shape and forms of our bodies have the same shapes and forms are expressed in different scales in ways so that we're connected with all of reality, all of nature.
Could you give me an example of that?
The human body itself is the same forms are repeated. but it's kind of subtle so that it's not as obvious as with the mathematical shape of a fractal. But if you think about it, your body has two limbs that are kind of longish in a torso, and then a smaller limb, if you call your head a limb. And then if you look at your hand is similar. It has four longer limbs, and then a little stubbier limb, your thumb. So your thumb is kind of like your head, and your other fingers are your arms and legs.
I can see that.
And then for your hands and feet, there are 5 appendages on each of them. But you might ask, well, what about your head? But if you notice, there are obvious shapes on your head. You might say, your mouth is one, and your nostrils and your eyes are 2 other similar ones. Or maybe your ears. But see, it breaks down.
Right. So it keeps breaking down?
It's never an exact mathematical shape, but it sort of tends towards that. The shape of our body tends toward a fractal-like shape. And I don't know, you've studied massage and yoga, and there is this idea that the palms of your hand, for example, can have points in them that represents the internal organs of the body. Isn't that a thing?
Yeah, and reflexology.
Yeah. So we can just start to see, as if we look a little bit deeply and think about the meaning of things and the shapes of things, they're reflected all around us. And we're more connected to the world around us. We're not separate from it.
I think that's one of the greatest detriments of humans in the modern era, in my estimation, is this deep dive into separation, where by way of our socioeconomic system and technology being in bondage to it, that technology is often used to further facilitate a divide between us. So, for instance, I don't know how it would be different in terms of cell phones and screens, our personal computers in our pockets. But I do wonder, if we lived in a different socioeconomic system, how technology could facilitate and complement community, non-separation, and so on. And I know that's an area that also has been a draw for me in terms of your work, is the way in which you've been able to really be a proponent of a very ancient technology, the wheel.
Yeah, or you're referring to Boxy bikes.
Boxy bikes.
Well, or as you were
bicycles
talking, I was also thinking too how I started Boxy Bikes, which is a company that sells electric bikes and rents electric bikes and repairs electric bikes, and the motivation for me was that I saw this as a real electric bikes are capable of replacing cars in people's lives in a super energy efficient way. Like an electric bike can get you around town just as quickly as a car for like 1/100th the energy. And so I started the company because of my fears about climate change and just the knowledge that fossil fuels, the burning of fossil fuels by our species, is starting to make our planet a more dangerous place to live, and I'm realizing though that that route to changing the world won't necessarily work without also a change in consciousness.
Boxy Bikes has been central in, and your work with Boxy Bikes also led you to doing some of the work with the bike share in Ithaca?
I worked for Lime Bike for a couple of years when they were in Ithaca. They've since pulled out of Ithaca.
Why?
They found that bicycles in a small town wasn't profitable enough, whereas scooters, in a town where there were millions of people, were just much more profitable. So, and I think they've been experimenting with different models for bike share, and my sense is that we can all conclude that a homegrown solution would work better for Ithaca. And Boxy Bikes is working with the Bike Walk Tompkins, the local bicycling advocacy group, to see what would work for Ithaca.
Okay. Yeah, I always wondered about the bike shares. Like, I know I first came across the bike shares when I was in DC, and they had this, I guess the city of DC had some kind of relationship with Citibank, and then they had all these Citibank bikes everywhere.
That's in New York City.
And New York City.
Yeah.
In New York City as well.
Yeah.
Was it a different company or a bank in DC?
I think in DC they tried the bike share and scooters that were sort of more free-ranging rather than having to be returned to a kiosk.
What does that mean, free-ranging?
People can park them just anywhere, and then new customers can find them on a map because they all have the GPS.
Right. Yeah. You know what? I actually came across that in Baltimore, where they have scooters. Like those motorized scooters. So not a scooter like a motorcycle, but the ones that are
like a razor style.
Yeah. Exactly. And then I would notice that they would be on like some patch of grass somewhere in an alley or something like that. So like how does that work? Does it work?
I think it works in some ways, but then also it does bother a lot of people to see the scooters and the bikes just lying around everywhere. And at Lime, we tried to make an effort to go and pick them up and put them in better spots. But
so Lime was also free range.
Yeah.
Okay, and how long did the whole Lime thing? How'd you get involved, and like what was the outcome? Like, was there, did people in Ithaca use it? Was there popular support?
Oh yeah, I got involved. I guess that would be 2017, and I was the main mechanic for maintaining the fleet. And at one point we had, I think, 400 bikes, maybe half electric and half pedal powered, all over Ithaca, and it made a lot of money. But then I think Lime also had a lot of expenses, and they were a venture capital run company. Like, they were just trying to capture market share and experiment rather than make a profit, just like a lot of venture capital funded companies can exist for a long time without actually making a profit, like Amazon.com for other companies, just in order to become the number one company. So they, in my opinion, were very wasteful. They had a huge warehouse and several vans to move the bikes around and lots of employees. It seemed to me they could have served Ithaca better with a lot fewer expenses, So I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about what would work for Ithaca.
Yeah, so what would be different? Like, what would have made Lime work, and how could they have been more resourceful?
Well, one of the main differences, I think, is that you really need two different kinds of bike share in Ithaca because of the geography of this place. Like, the bike share companies have no idea that Ithaca is very much divided geographically by all the hills. And so if someone needs to go, down from their house, down West Hill, across town, and then up the north, up to Cornell, that's just a huge range and a lot of, and the bikes that Lime had weren't powered, didn't have enough power to get up the hills here. And so a lot of the bike share use in Ithaca was just in the flat areas of town. So my idea is that we need two different bike share companies. One, you could use just very inexpensive 3-speed bikes for around town, but then you need like a $2,000 bike to get up and down the hills here safely. And so that.
What would that bike? What would make that bike conducive to going up and down the hill safely?
Basically, for an e-bike, in order to get low enough gearing for these hills, you need a mid-drive motor. So it's a motor that is attached to the cranks of the bike rather than in the wheel. The motors in the wheel are called hub motors, and the motors in the crank of the bike are called mid-drive or crank drive motors. And that kind of motor can get much lower gearing, and so that it can make it up the hill without very much effort at all. But I know from personal experience, like I've experimented with dozens of different e-bikes, and the hub drive motors, they can barely carry their own weight up the hills here, and they can burn out. Like actually smoke coming out of them.
Right. Wow.
They get too hot.
Wait, so what's the alternative to the hub drive?
The mid-drive motor.
Mid-drive motor.
So Boxy Bikes is standardized on a particular kind of mid-drive that's powerful enough and gets low gearing for getting up the hills here.
Okay. And what's the difference in material and mechanics for the mid-drive motor? Or between the two?
Another issue, beyond just the power of the motor and the gearing, is the kinds of brakes that you would have on a bike. And the Lime bikes, I feel, didn't have brakes that were adequate for coming down the hills here, and so it's a little bit more expensive, but nicer bikes have what are called disc brakes, so they have a rotor attached to the wheel rather than grabbing the rim of the wheel. And then especially sometimes disc brakes can have a hydraulic fluid instead of a cable, so it's much more powerful braking action. So just in this town, it can be really dangerous if you lose your brakes on a hill here.
Right.
And so the more expensive brakes are pretty much a requirement.
Were there any issues with Lime and like people using Lime bikes and getting into accidents?
We don't really know, because a lot of times we would just find a bike crashed at the bottom of a hill, and we didn't really know or investigate, who did that and what happened to them.
Wait, so how did you guys keep track? How did you guys keep track of like who was getting the bike and all of those things?
The software does keep track of it, but it anonymizes the who the rider is.
Okay.
I think you need special access to actually figure out the name of the writer.
So then
or
what
contact
happens in the
information.
case where someone damages the bike?
Lime just had a policy of not pursuing that.
Huh.
Yeah, I guess they just didn't want to make waves.
So then for a bike share to work, would that have to be different? Would there have to be some level of accountability?
Yeah, and currently Boxy Bikes uses a rental model, which is more like renting a car, where if you damage the car and you didn't buy insurance, then you have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, definitely, Boxy Bikes can't ignore if someone damages a bike.
Right,
Yes.
right. Yeah, and also it just seems like being inconsequential about it also kind of reinforces the entitlement culture that I think a lot of us kind of default on, where we might move in somewhere, trash the place, and not really have to think about what's going to happen. And I think that's probably why people ask for a security deposit.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people saw Lime as an adversary rather than as a benign company providing them a service. So people would set the Lime bikes on fire or throw them in the lake.
Really?
But Lime's strategy was just to make so many bikes that it didn't really damage the company's bottom line. So, and I think as a big corporate entity, they could do that, but a small company couldn't afford to do that. And a small company would have relationships with the customers that weren't adversarial.
Right. So what are the people who are adversarial and burning bikes and throwing them in the lake doing it because they saw Lime as being some type of corporate evil? Or?
Yeah, as the man or whatever,
Okay.
as an entity that was trying to make them addicted to its product, and then yeah, I don't know. There were, I guess my boss called them Lime haters, and just half a dozen Lime haters in a town can destroy a lot of bikes.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that also makes me think about education. On the one hand, there's Lime, and clearly there's an issue when an external entity comes into a town without relationship to that town or people.
Yeah.
So that they don't even know the landscape. But then there's the other issue of stuff. Not only is it an issue that Lime is able to produce even more bikes and not have to worry about their bottom line, which a small company can't do. For me, the bigger issue is would you want to, as a smaller company, be a proponent of more stuff? I think that's kind of what we're seeing with the issues with going back to climate change, and part of what drew you to looking at bikes as an alternative is our addiction to stuff and our trashing the planet.
Yeah, that does concern me. That sometimes I wonder if I'm just providing people with a new toy rather than a change in consciousness. Maybe that's one reason I branched out and got Doug and I conceived of this Beyond, because I can see Ithaca has a lot of activists, and sometimes their style of activism seems almost as bad as what they're fighting against. All of that anger and forceful energy is really what's brought us to the to climate change and the destruction of natural habitats. So really what's needed is a shift in consciousness rather than new toys.
Yeah, I love that. I was actually going to ask you about with Boxy bikes and like Boxy bikes working with maybe building a more innate indigenous model of a bike share culture. Would there have to be some type of education involved? But I think what I'm hearing from you isn't that there would just need to be education involved, but actually a shift in consciousness. Because education can be the imparting of knowledge, and that could also be stuff.
And people are comfortable with that. I think people naturally react against anyone shifting their consciousness. But I think a lot of people are starting to see how it's possible and how it's necessary. I'm really heartened by a book that came out recently by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind. Have you heard of that or read that?
I didn't read that one. I've read a few of his others.
And he explores the history of psychedelic drugs and how they were starting to become considered valuable for therapy in the 60s and for treating addiction and OCD and a lot of the mental states people get trapped in. But then he documents how Timothy Leary kind of ruined it for everyone, because by being so adamant about and open and I don't know that anyone else could have done it better than Timothy Leary, but he brought down the ire of mainstream America and government institutions. But people are starting to look at psychedelic drugs again as a possible path to breaking free and from pathological mental states.
Well, part of that discussion for me would beg the question of the amount of death by addiction that's been more and more of a growing happenstance, where there are more people addicted to drugs every year, more people dying of overdose from drugs. So how would that happen, where that distinction between just having a psychic experience for consciousness shifting versus a desire to keep having that experience because it was ephemeral?
Yeah. Well, they say psychedelics are not addictive or not as addictive as some drugs because the effect isn't as they're not as effective if you do them over and over again. I don't know, but I think my message for people is that you don't need psychedelic drugs. You can have the same experience, a transformative experience without them, and that's what happened to me. But the problem is I can't really say how it happened to me. I don't really know what happened.
Well, you know what I love
but I know it's possible.
It's possible, and it was possible because there must have been something within you that was willing to also surrender.
Yeah, maybe so. I don't know. It's perplexing, and I don't know if it was something about me or something about the person that triggered my awakening. And so that has actually been a big a big quest in my life to figure that out. But so much of it is beyond words or hasn't been able to be studied or hasn't been studied for whatever reason, or can't be even talked about because so much of what happens is beyond language.
I love this repetition of beyond.
Yeah.
Like, we're in the beyond art space, and of course it gives us further context. And there's these nuances to this term where this experience is beyond almost words, language, explanation. And as such, that poses a huge threat to, just to extend the corporate model and ideology to what you were saying about Lyme. Is so much of the corporate model is based on being able to replicate itself and reproduction. And so, like, whether it's franchising out a McDonald's or franchising out a yoga studio. And so how do you do that with something like shifting consciousness? Is that even possible?
Yeah, it does seem like it resists that. And a lot of these processes almost seem to be sentient in some way, and if you try and control them too much, then things go wrong. And you really do have to let things follow their own path. Trying to control it or monetize it ruins it. Yeah, and I do wonder with Beyond what will happen as we get bigger and bigger and start making money, and then all these issues come up of who gets the money. And I mean, artists do need to be paid, but so far it's been such a great to operate on a personal scale. I mean, when we opened the space here, we wondered, well, how can we let people make donations? And we just put a jar on the table that says donations, and that actually has been a really great way to get money. And it really shows how much people care about this space and how much they value it, rather than us being funded by one person giving a lot of money. It's being funded by thousands and thousands of people giving small amounts of money.
Right.
And I think that's a much more secure way and a much more friendly and authentic way to...
Yeah, it reminds me of the term selling out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, I remember when I was younger and there would be a band that my brothers and I might be listening to, and we loved their music, and then next thing we know, more people were knowing about them, and next thing we know, they're in the Emmys. Right? And it's like, oh no, they sold out.
Yeah. And I think the mark of a true artist is they can continue to be authentic for their whole career and not really care about the fame and fortune, but just follow their heart.
Yeah. I mean, I see that as possible as well. Like, so you can maybe receive a certain level of celebration and fame, but it doesn't necessarily have to lead to shifting you, but it can. So I see that with, for instance, with an artist like Björk, where she seems to have maintained, a profound relationship with her art and the way she engages with her music, regardless of how many people have come to embrace her, and regardless of how much she's scaled as an artist, she's still kind of maintained this. But I do wonder if that's always possible. It does seem like power can corrupt, and money is power, and fame and all those things.
Well, I just think of the artists who put together this show, and all of them are really just doing it for the love of what they do. Not that they don't want to, maybe just break even or make a little bit of money, but the group is very passion driven.
How did you guys get? So there was you and Doug, but then how did you guys recruit like the 20 other people who were part of this exhibit as well?
Well, I guess Doug and I decided we came together making art cars for Burning Man, and then we had an aha moment when we went to see a movie about the Meow Wolf Collective. So you've heard of that group? It's
I don't think so.
It's a collective of artists in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Okay.
And they
oh, right.
converted a bowling alley to an interactive art space.
That's right.
Very psychedelic as well, and interactive and immersive.
Yeah, in fact, the reason I recall them is because you told me about them sometime
Yeah.
ago.
And they made a movie, a feature-length movie of their origin story.
Huh.
And Doug and I went to see that at the mall. We were, I think, the only people in this huge theater watching this movie. And at the end of it, we were just so impressed and excited. We're like, we have to do something like this in Ithaca. And so everything we've done since then has been with a mind to reproducing their success. So it was in early 2020 we started showing that movie at Doug's house and having big potluck dinners, and we attracted like 40 or 50 people who were interested in participating, and we were going to have a big public unveiling in April, the first week of April 2020. But if you recall, like that was right when COVID hit, and we had to cancel, and we've been just kind of reduced to just a core group of 7 or 8 people.
And when you say
continue to work on it,
a core group, like, would you consider yourself an art collective?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Beyond Art Collective we call it that.
And what's the relationship between the Beyond Art Collective and is it the Regenerator space?
The Ithaca Generator.
Ithaca Generator.
There's some overlap. A lot of the people interested in making art are also Generator members, active Generator members. Ithaca Generator is a maker space. Like most big cities have a maker space where people buy tools together. I think I said before.
Yeah.
And so Norm Scott, I think, is a good example. He's
the one who made the musical.
He calls it Penumbra. Penumbra. It's basically several strings hanging from the ceiling, and if people pull on them, they make a whole soundscape emerges, and people can control the instruments and the pace of it just by pulling on the strings. And he made the talking skeleton that you can ask it a yes/no question, and it'll prophecy for you. And so he's very active at the Generator. So many of the other artists are from the burner community. Liz Ciora Jones makes altars with a strong goddess vibe. Damaris and Tico make psychedelic art and day-glow body painting. Your listeners may know about.
Yeah, I had the honor of interviewing Tico and also being painted by him and Don Maurice a year prior, full from head to toe, and I did a yoga sequence to the vibration they created in me. But yeah, they're powerful artists as well.
And I guess a couple of years ago, I met the love of my life, Judy Swan, and she has been really instrumental in pushing Beyond forward and making it a success. And everyone participated in small and large ways. Will Weaver is artist from who we met at some of the regional burns in the area, and he really pulled through when the fire inspector had trouble with our installation. We had maybe put up some cloth over the sprinkler heads in the space, and she objected to that, the fire inspector, and some other things. And Will stepped forward and got information about fireproof fabric, and we had to redo a lot of the fabric in the space, and the blackout cloth, and so it really was a group effort.
Right, it reminds me of just being a village, and how by way of work you stay accountable to one another. So like even beyond individual personality, because you're working with on something together, and because whatever the nature of the work is, it poses problems will come along with it, then you're also required to like wrangle with those issues. So whether it's making the unicorn and figuring out how to get this 12-foot unicorn to like be completely mobile, because it is, like its legs may move, its feet move. But by way of that, then you're engaging in conflict, and that conflict allows you to shift and grow. And that's something I do see as a theme in terms of growth happening, is that when we're able to embrace conflict in a way that is part of figuring something out together, to grow not necessarily past it, but beyond it.
Yeah, beyond. Yeah, I do have this sense that the goddess doesn't give away anything easily. She makes you work at it, but she always provides the solution somewhere nearby, but she makes you look for it. Like, you might be in some situation where, we need this bolt to put the leg on the unicorn, but we can't get that bolt. But if you look around and follow your intuition, you'll see, in this drawer over here is just the bolt we need to finish the unicorn.
Right.
That kind of situation happens over and over again. In the burner community, they have a saying. They say, the plier provides. Like, it's almost as if you have a problem and you just wish for a solution, the solution appears. It's kind of magical the way it works.
Well, this space is kind of magical, and I think a lot of people experience it. Of course, the unicorn embodies people's collective imagination when it comes to magic. The one thing I have wondered about, I know we had a little bit of conversation about it in the past, is that this is an amazing space because it's interactive, it's local artists, people get to not just engage with the space but also artists at times, and it's a tactile experience. What I have noticed is that people do come in with their groups, or maybe couples might come in, maybe sometimes individuals, and they're having this interactive experience, but they're not interacting with one another. So I'm wondering what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, I don't know if that's completely true. I'm thinking how, like, with the volleyball brawl video game over here, we always hear a lot, people are like just laughing uproariously, playing it together, or often with a couple, they'll want to climb up on the unicorn together and take a selfie.
But usually those couples come together, like they're already coupled up.
Yeah.
So it's definitely drawing deeper bonds
between
the people who are coming. But I guess what I'm wondering is, have you thought about, or do you have, or is it important for you, it might not be, for people who are strangers to one another, and maybe even groups that are strangers to one another, to be able to have interaction, if there's ways to facilitate that?
Yeah, It's true, we haven't given that a lot of thought. I will say one of our plans for Sparky when we take him to Burning Man next year is we were trying to think about how to make it Sparky more of an event, and we have this idea that he could be part of a kind of like a dinner theater experience for people, that there could be some kind of narrative, and so that there's some goal in which Sparky is a key to solving a puzzle of some kind, or achieving a goal, and that people have to work together. I guess there have been these immersive environments that involve group puzzle solving, and we haven't really explored that. There's no real puzzle here, but I do know the Meow Wolf also, in each of they have 3 spaces now. They have a narrative of some kind, and there's just kind of a hint that something's wrong and that there's something to be solved. Like their original space, I think it's called House of Many Returns, and you're in a family home, and it becomes clear that the family is missing. They traveled to another dimension or something like that, and the question is, what happened to them, and how can first you have to figure out what the issue is, and then you have to figure out how to resolve it. And I don't know that there even really is a definitive answer,
right?
But that draws people in, this idea that there's a puzzle to be solved.
Right.
And that is something we could build more into our space.
Yeah, I love the idea of that, and I love the idea of keeping it open-ended and authentic, so that it's not necessarily something contrived where there's a definitive answer, but the working together on a problem at 4:30 p.m. By a group of strangers who happen to be in the space at the same time looks different than the group of strangers who come in at 7 p.m. And both of their conclusions in solving the problem lead to something new, so that it also then contributes to recreating the space.
Yeah, and we do have some of the artists in the collective are experienced with that sort of thing. Judy is a writer, and also one of our burner friends in Chicago was a professional playwright, and we were hoping to get her involved with making a narrative for Sparky for Burning Man 2022. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I think for me, like, the main takeaway that's like in my head now, Laurence, is I was wondering, like, coming into this conversation with you about potentially these 2 disparate worlds, like Boxy Bikes and the Beyond Art Space. And I think the bridge you drew for me, which is so beautiful and essential, is the role of shifting consciousness.
Yeah, and I wanted to say all of my art is about changing consciousness and personal transformation, and it all comes from my own experience in 2016. But I was noticing the other day that the format, the architecture of this space, of the pop-up, of the art lounge, we call it, in a way kind of mimics or mirrors my personal experience. And I don't think that was conscious on our part. We did have this sense that we wanted people to enter the space in a way that was humbling. And so we originally had conceived of people entering the space by getting on their hands and knees and crawling through a tunnel. But we realized a lot of people couldn't or wouldn't want to do that. But we do have an opening that's kind of like a cupboard, kind of from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And that coincidentally, the opening does have mushrooms people painted on it, so there is this sense too that it's kind of going to be like a psychedelic experience. And then when you enter the cupboard, it's a magical forest using infinity mirrors on both walls. And for me, I was remembering that kind of parallels my own realization. I remember, I can't really say what I saw in that moment of my realization, but it was something to the effect of the experience you might get from seeing a mirror within a mirror within a mirror, and so I think that the mirror wall, the mirror room, captures that sense of realization, of seeing yourself. The mirror is a very powerful symbol. And then as you go through the magical forest, in the infinity mirrors, you open up into this wider space, and wider means expanded, and it's a space of expanded consciousness. And there's all kinds of things in that space that might remind you or of what it's like to be in a state of expanded consciousness, maybe from your own childhood or from a psychedelic drug experience, or in my own case, a spiritual awakening experience. And you'll find spiritual guides in that space, or you'll also find a task before you in the form of a video game, perhaps. Like you have to work with others to accomplish a task. That's kind of the feeling you get from a state of expanded consciousness. Or you'll experience the goddess. One of our artists, Liz C.R. Jones, has installed an altar to the goddess. I had my own personal experience, a goddess manifesting herself during my own awakening. Or you might start to, in an expanded state of consciousness, you might start to feel inanimate objects have their own life force within them that you can sense. So like the furniture we're sitting on is just ordinary living room furniture that we've covered with fur and added eyes and a mouth to. So that's maybe a good metaphor for...
Right, like taking their ordinary and expanding it into a consciousness almost, where it takes on a dimension of extraordinary. And that's also true with just walking through a hall, for instance. So like entering this space is almost symbolic of entering that consciousness portal that allowed you to go through this state of expansion. And I'm wondering if expanded consciousness, this idea of a mirror within a mirror within a mirror that became available to you, is it liberating or can it kill you? Can it be overwhelming?
I was actually kind of pissed off at first that it happened to me. It was very upsetting. It was almost like an act of violence against me. I was in a happy state of, I was asleep and I didn't want to be woken up, but it happened, and I had this for months, for years, this intense feeling of resentment toward the person who awakened me, but also great love for them too. So I was super conflicted about it, and it was not an easy thing, and it was not always a happy thing, but I think it led to a state of bliss. And maybe that's what Sparky the unicorn represents. As you come through the main room of the exhibit, the room that represents expanded consciousness, you enter back into the world, but within that world, you're riding a giant unicorn, and the unicorn is a very sensual symbol. So,
How so?
There's a lot of lore, mythology about the unicorn being an aphrodisiac, or the unicorn prefers virgins, or this and that about the unicorn being a very sensual being and a catalyst for sensuality in your life.
It's a good thing the unicorn keeps themselves concealed from the human realm, except for a few folks like yourself who are able to catch a glimpse. Otherwise, I could only imagine the kind of commodification the unicorn would experience being mass-produced, manufactured. Their horn probably used for some type of herbal medicine as an aphrodisiac.
Yeah. And the unicorn also, there's a myth that if you eat the flesh of a unicorn, you'll live forever. And so there's also this sense that you enter into a timeless realm. And my own experience is that I entered into a loving relationship with someone who I love very much, not the person who awakened me, but a person who shares my interests, and we're very loving with each other, and I think we've found heaven on earth. We're in a very blissful relationship.
Right, yeah.
So it ended well for me. It's been 5 years.
What does that mean to say it ended well? So was there a conclusion to this awakening? Is it over now and now you're back to human form?
We lived happily ever after. That's what they say, right? In the stories. Yeah, and we both are actively engaged in healing the world and helping others.
You and your other self?
My partner, Judy.
Okay. And what about the self that went through the awakening? Is that self still present as well?
It's a self that we all have a connection to. I see it's our true self, maybe you would call it, or the God within. And my connection with that self, I've trained myself to be able to drink from that spring when I need to, but I don't live there full time like I used to.
Well, thank you so much, Laurence, for allowing us to delve a little deeper into the spring of expanded consciousness by way of sharing your story and allowing us to get a little sip of it, and hopefully we'll be able to grow deeper in our own relationship to what might otherwise seem mundane, and expand that so that we can go into the beyond.
Yes. Thank you, Essie. You've been a great guide for me. I really appreciate it.
Likewise. Yay.
Thank you.